The evening rush at the restaurant always came like a wave crashing through the doors, and the staff had grown used to swimming through it. But for the young waitress working the late shift, every night felt heavier than the last. People only knew her as the quiet girl, the one who moved fast, kept her head down, and never complained. Her real struggles were invisible to the customers who came in dressed in expensive clothes, laughing loudly as if life never held any weight. She didn't mind that they didn't know her name. She didn't mind that most barely noticed her at all. What mattered to her was finishing each day without mistakes so she could keep her job and earn whatever she needed to survive. Her hands were always cold, her feet always sore, and her back constantly aching from lifting trays, but she didn't show any of it. She simply breathed through the pain and carried on. The restaurant where she worked was one of the most luxurious spots in the city. Large glass windows wrapped around the building, giving customers a clear view of the glowing skyline. Soft golden lights hung above each table, and the shelves behind the bar sparkled with bottles that cost more than she made in a month. And in the center of the dining hall stood a glossy black grand piano, smooth, polished, and lit from above so it looked like a piece of art. Most nights, a hired musician played there. The gentle music blended with the sound of clinking glasses and conversations, creating an atmosphere that made customers feel special. Tonight, however, the piano sat silent. The musician hadn't arrived yet, which made the place feel slightly incomplete. Still, the customers didn't seem to care. They were too busy ordering food, taking photos of their plates, and discussing business deals. The waitress moved between tables as quickly as she could while trying not to look stressed. Her apron was faded from years of washing, and her shoes were worn out. But every movement she made was careful and precise. She remembered orders without needing to write them down, and she always smiled politely, even when someone snapped their fingers at her. Tonight, she needed the shift more than ever. Her mother's medical bills were overdue again, and the last notice had warned that services might be cut off. The thought of her mother suffering alone in a tiny apartment made her chest tighten. She had taken on extra shifts, skipped meals, and sold most of her belongings just to keep things afloat. Still, it never felt like enough. She had grown used to stretching every dollar, skipping bus rides to walk instead, and living on the cheapest food she could find. People looked at her and assumed she was simply tired from work, but the truth was she carried the weight of responsibilities far greater than her size. She had learned not to share her struggles. Whenever she tried in the past, people made promises they couldn't keep or offered advice that didn't help. Over time, silence felt safer. As she placed a tray of sparkling drinks onto a table of wealthy guests, she heard them discussing investments. Their watches shined like tiny suns, and their perfumes filled the air. They spoke loudly and confidently, the way people do when they never question where their next meal will come from. She lowered her eyes and stepped away before they had the chance to wave her off impatiently. In moments like these, she wondered what it would feel like to live without fear of the future. What would it be like to breathe without worrying about money? What would it be like to sleep peacefully instead of tossing and turning, calculating bills in her head? She longed for a life where hope didn't feel like a luxury. Her break wasn't for another 2 hours, but her legs were already trembling. She reached the kitchen to pick up new orders, inhaling deeply to steady herself. The kitchen staff shouted instructions to each other while pans hissed on the stoves. The noise was chaotic, but at least it drowned out her thoughts for a moment. "Order up," called one of the cooks, sliding a plate toward her. She grabbed it carefully, balancing it with 2 others, and carried them back out to the dining floor. As she walked past the grand piano, she felt that familiar ache tug at her chest. The piano meant more to her than anyone here could guess. Once, years ago, she had dreamed of sitting at a piano on a brightly lit stage. She used to imagine an audience listening quietly, waiting for the sound of her fingers on the keys. She believed she could make people feel something real through music: joy, sadness, hope, healing. She believed she was meant for something beautiful. Her father had been the first to teach her. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he knew how to play. On quiet evenings, he would sit beside her at an old piano they found at a thrift store. The keys were chipped, and some notes didn't sound right, but it didn't matter to either of them. She loved those evenings more than anything. His patient voice, his warm hands guiding hers, and the way he said she had a gift she should never let go of. But life had different plans. After her father passed away unexpectedly, everything collapsed around her. Her mother fell into deep grief, then illness. Bills piled up. Lessons stopped. Dreams were pushed aside so she could work and survive. Music slowly faded into the background like a distant memory she could no longer hold. Still, whenever she passed the grand piano at the restaurant, she felt a pull inside her. It reminded her of who she used to be. Someone hopeful. Someone who believed her life could be more than constant struggle. Sometimes she imagined touching the keys just once, just to feel a piece of her old life again. But she never dared. Employees weren't allowed to touch the piano, and even if they were, she didn't feel worthy of it anymore. She was a waitress now. That was her place, the role life had pushed her into. A sudden burst of laughter from a nearby table snapped her out of her thoughts. She hurried to the counter, grabbed a tray filled with desserts, and rushed toward the customers who had ordered them. As she leaned forward to place the plates down, one of the guests bumped the table, causing a spoon to fall onto the floor. The sound of it hitting the ground made her flinch even though she knew it wasn't her fault. She quickly bent down, picked it up, and apologized softly. The guest waved her away, barely looking at her. She swallowed her embarrassment and continued working. She was used to moments like that. They stung, but she knew reacting would only cause more trouble. The restaurant continued to fill with people, and the pressure inside her chest grew heavier. She felt like a small boat drifting through waves that were always just a little too big. But she kept moving, kept smiling, kept pretending she was fine. The manager walked past her, muttering about the missing pianist. He looked stressed more than usual. The night was important because some high-profile guests were dining there, and the lack of music made everything feel off. The manager snapped at a few staff members before hurrying away again. She didn't judge him. Everyone here was dealing with their own problems. Hers just happened to be buried deeper than most. As the night went on, and she continued circling the hall with plates, drinks, and menus, she tried to focus on the rhythm of work. It was the only rhythm she had left. But every time she passed the piano, she couldn't help glancing at it, imagining the warmth of its keys under her fingers. And somewhere deep inside her, a tiny spark flickered, small, fragile, but still alive. A spark that whispered that life could change in a moment. That even someone like her, unnoticed and worn down, might be given a chance to feel alive again. She didn't know that before the night ended, the piano she had only dreamed of touching would call her forward in a way she couldn't have prepared for. She didn't know that her quiet world of exhaustion and struggle was about to collide with the world of the wealthy guests who barely saw her as a person. She didn't know that everything was about to shift, but fate was moving quietly around her, arranging something she never would have dared to hope for. And it all began with a single moment she could not yet see coming. The night carried on, and though the restaurant buzzed with life, the young waitress felt as if she were moving through a world made of glass, fragile, breakable, and echoing with memories she had tried hard to bury. The grand piano sat untouched in the center of it all, like a shadow of her past sitting in plain sight. Each time she passed it, her heart pulled toward it in a gentle ache, but she forced her eyes away and focused on delivering plates with steady hands. She had taught herself long ago to keep her emotions tucked deep inside. There was no room for hope, no space for dreams. When bills were due, when medicines needed to be bought, when rent deadlines pressed closer, the things she once loved had to be left behind. Music had been the first thing she sacrificed, and the pain of losing it was something she rarely let herself feel. But some memories refused to fade. Years ago, before life fell apart, she remembered waking up to the faint sound of piano notes drifting through the house. She would walk quietly down the hallway to find her father sitting at the old wooden piano, humming softly while playing melodies that seemed to warm the air. He always smiled when she joined him. She could still recall the way he would guide her small fingers across the keys, whispering that music was a language of the heart, one that didn't need words to be understood. For a long time she believed him, For a long time, she believed the world held a place for someone like her. But losing him had changed everything. Bills piled up. The little piano was sold piece by piece until eventually, only the memory of its sound remained. Those hard years pushed her out of school and into endless work. Every day became a struggle to keep herself and her mother afloat. Music became a luxury she could no longer afford. Now, the only place she heard piano music was here at the restaurant, when the hired musician filled the nights with soft melodies. Melodies she couldn't listen to without feeling a sting in her chest. On most evenings, she avoided standing anywhere near the piano, choosing instead to focus on work with tunnel vision. But tonight, the silence around the piano felt louder than music. As she wiped down a table near the bar, two of the servers chatted nearby, unaware that she could hear them. "Did the pianist really cancel again?" one whispered. "Yeah," the other replied. "Third time this month. The manager's losing it. They're saying some wealthy investor might show up tonight. The place is supposed to look perfect." "Well, good luck with that. Without the music, the vibe feels off." She pretended she didn't hear them. She didn't want to think about the piano anyway. It was easier to pretend music no longer existed than to wonder what her life might have been if things had gone differently. Still, something about tonight felt unusual. A faint uneasiness hung in the air, the kind that makes you feel as if something big is about to happen, even though you don't know what it is. As she returned to the kitchen for another tray of drinks, the head cook glanced at her with mild concern. "You look pale," he said, not unkindly. "I'm fine," she answered softly. "Just a long shift." "It's always a long shift here," he chuckled, though his eyes stayed warm. "Drink some water when you get a minute." She nodded and thanked him before heading back out. Acts of kindness, even small ones, always felt like a shock to her system. She never expected people to notice her struggles. Most didn't. Back in the dining hall, the restaurant was busier now. Laughter rose and fell like waves. Silverware clattered gently, and rich fragrances from the kitchen drifted through the air. The kind of atmosphere people came here for. A place where life felt easy, where comfort was guaranteed, where nobody had to worry about tomorrow. She walked past a table of guests in expensive suits. One of them spoke loudly, apparently enjoying the sound of his own voice. "This place is nice, but without music, it feels incomplete," he complained. "What's the point of having that piano if no one's going to play it?" His friend laughed and shrugged. "Maybe it's just decoration." Ridiculous. A restaurant of this level should do better. She kept her gaze down, hoping none of the guests would call her over to complain further. The last thing she needed was extra stress. She was already carrying too much inside her chest. When she reached the next table, an older couple smiled at her kindly as she placed down their plates. The woman said, "Thank you, dear," in a gentle voice. It reminded her of how her mother used to sound before illness weakened her. She felt her throat tighten for a moment, but she smiled and replied softly before walking away. As she made her rounds, she found herself drifting toward the piano again, this time without meaning to. She stopped a few feet away from it, caught in a moment she couldn't explain. The piano gleamed under the lights, spotless and perfect, the kind of instrument her father would have adored. She imagined how the keys would feel beneath her fingers. Smooth, cool, familiar. How strange that something could feel so close and yet so impossibly out of reach. "What are you doing?" a coworker suddenly asked, making her flinch. She stepped back quickly. "Nothing. Just walking by." "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine," she said again, forcing a small smile before hurrying back to the counter. She tried to shake off the feeling, but the truth was that the piano stirred something inside her she didn't want to face. A reminder of a path she once dreamed of walking but lost long ago. She wished the musician were here, just so the sound could fill the room and drown out her thoughts. Time went on, tables filled and emptied, and the floor grew stickier from spilled drinks the staff couldn't clean fast enough. She wasn't even halfway through her shift, yet exhaustion clung to her like a heavy coat. Her phone buzzed in her pocket during a quick break in the back hallway. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from her mother's caretaker. Her stomach tightened. She opened it with shaking hands. The message said her mother's condition had worsened slightly. Nothing severe yet, but they needed an extra payment for medication. Immediately, she closed her eyes. The world around her felt like it tilted for a moment. How was she supposed to get that money in time? She already took all the shifts she could. She already sold so many things. Tears threatened her eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't help. She had learned long ago that tears never solved anything. She responded with a quick message saying she would manage it somehow. She didn't know how, but she would have to. She couldn't let her mother go without medicine. When she stepped back into the dining area, she felt a strange heaviness in her chest. A mix of fear, frustration, and the quiet longing she kept hidden from the world. She reminded herself to breathe and focus on the tasks ahead. Just as she reached the next table, she noticed a wealthy-looking group entering the restaurant. They carried themselves in that effortless, confident way that people with power often did. The manager rushed over to greet them personally, offering handshakes and warm smiles. She kept her distance, delivering drinks to another table, but she overheard bits of the manager's conversation. "So glad you could join us tonight," he said eagerly. "We hope everything is perfect for your visit." One of the guests replied, "I heard you have a wonderful pianist here. Looking forward to hearing them." The manager stiffened, his smile faltering. Well, unfortunately." The guest raised an eyebrow. "There's no music tonight?" "We're working on it," the manager said quickly, though his voice sounded strained. "Please enjoy your evening in the meantime." The group walked to their table disappointed. The waitress felt a pang of sympathy for the manager. Everyone thought wealthy guests were the only ones allowed to feel pressure, but the manager faced it every night too. Keeping this place running wasn't easy, and tonight's missing music was clearly a problem. As she continued serving guests, she noticed the discomfort settling deeper into the room. People expected more from a place like this. They expected luxury, perfection, ambience. Without the piano, everything felt slightly off balance, like a picture missing a key color. The manager paced nervously near the bar, checking his phone repeatedly as if the musician might magically appear. The staff whispered to each other, wondering what would happen next. She didn't know it yet, but the silent piano in the center of the hall was about to call her forward. The life she had carefully folded into small, manageable pieces was about to unfold again in ways she never saw coming. All it needed was a single moment, a single choice she had never imagined she'd have the courage to make. But fate was already steering her toward it, one quiet step at a time. The clock in the dining hall ticked toward the busiest point of the night, and the restaurant seemed to vibrate with movement. Chairs scraped softly against the floor, glasses clinked, and conversations blended into a steady hum that filled every corner of the room. But despite all the noise, there was something missing, something that created a quiet discomfort under the surface. That missing piece was the music, and everyone felt it, even if most didn't say it aloud. The young waitress felt it more than anyone. She kept glancing at the grand piano every time she walked past it, as if the instrument were calling out without making a sound. She didn't understand why she kept noticing it. Maybe it was the memory of her father. Maybe it was because she was tired and emotional. Maybe it was simply impossible to ignore the thing that once meant everything to her. She delivered a tray of desserts to a group near the windows. They were wealthy, judging by their jewelry and the way they took their time with every bite as though time itself belonged to them. One of them snapped his fingers at her, complaining about the lack of live music. She nodded politely, apologized, and quickly moved on before they could say more. His words echoed in her mind, though she tried hard not to let them sting. The manager stood near the bar, pacing again. His forehead glistened with stress. Every time he checked the entrance, he seemed more upset. The pianist wasn't coming, that much was clear. But the guests kept arriving, and the pressure grew heavier with every new table filled. The waitress glanced toward the hallway leading to the bathroom, feeling the vibration of her phone in her apron pocket. She knew it was likely another message from the caretaker. Her stomach twisted. She didn't want to look, She didn't want another reminder of her financial problems right now, not while she was trying to hold herself together at work. She pushed the thought aside and continued her rounds. Near the center of the restaurant, a table of high-profile guests had settled in. Their appearance drew subtle attention from several customers, though most tried to pretend they weren't staring. These guests were known to be wealthy investors, people with influence, and the manager seemed determined to make sure their experience was flawless. He walked over to them again with a tight smile. "I hope everything is to your liking so far," he said with a polite voice that cracked slightly. "It's fine," one of them replied, his tone flat. "But the silence feels strange. We were told this place usually has live piano music." The manager swallowed. "Yes, of course. Our musician had an unexpected emergency tonight. We are trying to arrange something." "Well," another guest said, lifting an eyebrow, "you should arrange it quickly. This place isn't cheap." The waitress overheard it as she placed bread baskets on a nearby table. She felt a strange, sinking guilt, as if the silence of the piano was somehow her fault, which made no sense. She had nothing to do with the musician. She wasn't part of any decision-making. She was just a worker, one person among many. Yet she felt it. A weight, a subtle tug inside her that whispered she could do something, but she pushed it away instantly. No, she couldn't. That life was behind her. Her hands hadn't touched real piano keys in years. What was she even thinking? She forced herself to focus, wiping down a counter, straightening menus, checking on her tables. But the feeling didn't go away. Instead, it seemed to grow larger, pressing against her ribs, making her chest tight. The manager approached her out of nowhere, his voice sharp with frustration. "Table 12 needs more water," he said. "And make sure the bar has what it needs. Tonight can't be the night everything falls apart." She nodded quickly, knowing his anger wasn't really aimed at her. He was under pressure. Everyone was. She filled water pitchers and made her way to table 12, where the wealthy guests who earlier complained about the silence sat. The one in the navy suit tapped his fingers on the table impatiently, glancing toward the piano as though demanding it magically play itself. "Finally," he muttered when she approached. "This place feels empty without music." She placed the water carefully, keeping her voice calm. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir. We're doing our best tonight." He sighed dramatically, not looking at her. "This is why I prefer places with proper management. Everything is always prepared." She nodded once and walked away before her emotions could show. Her pulse was quick, her throat tight. She wished she could disappear into the kitchen, hide for a moment, breathe. But breaks weren't something she could afford right now, not with the restaurant full and the staff stretched thin. On her way back toward the counter, she passed the piano again. Its surface gleamed under the lights, and for a split second, she allowed herself to imagine sitting on the bench, reaching out and pressing one note. Just one. She imagined the sound filling the room, smoothing the edges of the noise, wrapping everything in warmth. Her father's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Music reveals who you are when words fail." She shut her eyes for half a second before forcing herself to keep walking. She didn't see the manager's panic rising again as he hurried to the hostess stand. She didn't notice the guests growing more restless. All she knew was that something inside her felt like it was cracking open. She reached the kitchen to drop off dirty dishes. One of the cooks noticed her faraway expression and waved his hand in front of her face. "You're drifting," he said lightly. "You okay?" She blinked, startled. "Sorry. Just thinking." "Thinking's dangerous in this place," he joked. "Better to shut your brain off until closing." She attempted to smile, but it faded quickly. As she stepped back onto the dining floor, the lights dimmed slightly. A routine adjustment the restaurant made every evening to create a softer, more elegant atmosphere. But tonight, the dimming seemed to highlight the silence even more. Without the pianist, the room felt unbalanced. Guests noticed it. Staff noticed it. She noticed it most of all. Then, a small accident occurred at a nearby table. A guest knocked over his drink, and the glass shattered across the floor. The sound echoed sharply, drawing attention. including hers. She immediately hurried over with towels and a broom. "I'm so sorry," she said gently as she cleaned the spill. "I'll take care of it immediately." "It's fine," the guest said with embarrassment. "Just startled me." Another guest at the table laughed lightly. "We need music," he said. "This silence makes every small sound so dramatic." His comment wasn't meant to be rude, but it pierced her more deeply than it should have. As she swept up the last of the glass, she felt the pressure inside her rising, like someone pushing against a door she couldn't hold shut anymore. Later, as she passed the piano once more, she stopped again without meaning to. She stared at the keys. Her fingers twitched slightly. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. A longing so strong it almost frightened her. She whispered to herself, so quietly no one else could hear, "I remember," her father's hands guiding hers. Her mother smiling before illness dimmed her energy. The sound of a melody she once played flawlessly. The warmth of applause from a small school event, years ago. The belief she used to carry. A soft voice behind her startled her. It was one of the younger servers. "You look like you're about to sit down and play," he joked gently. Her breath caught. "What? No, I'm just tired." He shrugged and walked away, not thinking anything of it. But the words stuck in her mind. About to sit down and play. She wasn't, of course. That was impossible. She was a waitress. She had responsibilities, bills, fears. She couldn't just... A loud voice interrupted her thoughts. One of the wealthy guests across the room raised his voice to the manager in irritation. "This is unbelievable," he said. "We expected music. Our evening is being ruined because of your unpreparedness." The manager stammered an apology, looking as if he might collapse from stress. The waitress watched the scene unfold. She felt something twist inside her. Frustration, sadness, exhaustion, and something else she couldn't name. Something that pushed gently but firmly against her fear. Maybe it was the hopelessness of her mother's situation. Maybe it was the frustration of being invisible every day. Maybe it was the lingering memory of who she used to be. Or maybe it was the simple truth that music was still inside her, waiting. Her legs felt shaky as she took a step toward the piano. Then another. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't plan it. She only knew that something inside her wouldn't let her walk away this time. She reached the side of the piano and stood there, trembling slightly. Her hands were cold. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it. The manager noticed her and frowned. "What are you doing?" he whispered urgently. She swallowed hard. Her voice came out small but steady. I can play." He stared at her in shock. "What?" he asked, unsure he heard correctly. "I can play," she repeated softly, her throat tight. "If you want." The room seemed to freeze for a moment, though no one else knew what was happening yet. The manager blinked at her, stunned and confused. "You?" he whispered. "You can play the piano?" She nodded, her hands trembling at her sides. "I can try." It wasn't the confident statement of someone showing off a talent. It was the quiet offering of someone who hadn't touched her dream in years. Someone who had nothing left to lose, and everything to regain. The manager stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. His eyes were wide. His lips pressed tightly together as if he wasn't sure whether he should be shocked, relieved, or suspicious. In all the months she had worked here, she had barely spoken more than a handful of sentences to him beyond work instructions. She was the quiet waitress, the one who blended into the background and did her job without complaint. He never imagined she could do anything else. You can play the piano?" he repeated, his voice almost unbelieving. She nodded slowly, her heart pounding so loudly she feared someone else might hear it. "Yes." "How well?" he whispered, leaning closer as if afraid the walls might overhear. She didn't know how to answer that. Years had passed since she last played seriously. Her fingers remembered, but she didn't know if they still moved with the confidence they once had. Still, she couldn't tell him that. She swallowed hard. "I can play enough for tonight," she said softly. The manager looked over his shoulder. The high-profile guests still shuffled impatiently at their table, checking their watches and muttering complaints. Other diners were beginning to notice the tension, glancing toward the empty piano like it was a wound that needed covering. He rubbed his forehead, then exhaled sharply, a sound filled with desperation and hope mixed together. "If you're serious," he murmured, "then sit. Play something calm, something fitting, something that will keep them from complaining." Her throat tightened. "I can try." He hesitated one more second, studying her face. Maybe he saw something there, fear, yes, but also sincerity. A kind of quiet determination that seemed out of place for someone who usually looked so worn down. "All right," he finally said. "Go ahead." She stepped toward the piano, her heart beating so fast it felt like it might break free from her chest. She could feel eyes turning toward her even though she kept hers low, looking only at the bench. Her hands trembled as she gently pulled the seat out. She could hear the staff whispering behind her. Confused, curious, maybe doubtful. "Is she really going to play? I didn't know she could. Do you think she'll mess up? Why would she lie about something like this?" Their voices swirled around her, but she tried to block them out. She sat carefully on the bench, her knees feeling weak. For a moment, she just stared at the long row of smooth white and black keys. She hadn't touched real piano keys in so long. Her reflection appeared faintly on the glossy surface. Tired eyes, messy hair, an apron with faint stains she couldn't wash out anymore. She looked like someone who had no business sitting at such a beautiful instrument. But there she was. She placed her trembling fingers gently on the keys. The coolness of the surface sent a strange warmth spreading through her chest. It felt like touching a forgotten part of herself, something she didn't know she could still reach. Her father's voice drifted through her memory. "Music is in your hands. It won't leave you, even when life gets hard." She inhaled deeply. She exhaled slowly, and then she began to play. The first note was soft, almost hesitant. A single sound that floated through the air like a delicate thread. She pressed the next, then another, forming a simple melody. Her hands felt stiff at first, as though waking from a long sleep, but with each note, they loosened, relaxed, remembered. The dining hall grew quiet almost instantly. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the clinking of glasses came to a halt. The soft melody wrapped around the room like a warm blanket. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy. It was gentle, steady, comforting. It filled the silence that had hung over the restaurant, smoothing every rough edge and calming every restless breath. People turned toward the piano, their faces softening with surprise. "Is that the waitress?" someone whispered. "She can play like that? Who knew?" At the investor's table, the guest in the navy suit leaned back slowly, his eyebrows rising. "Well," he murmured, "that's unexpected." But he didn't sound annoyed anymore. He sounded impressed. The manager stood frozen near the bar, staring at her as if witnessing something impossible. It was the first time he looked at her not as an employee, but as someone he never fully saw until this moment. She continued to play, her fingers moving more fluidly now. The melody grew slightly richer, the notes flowing into one another like a quiet river. Her back straightened, her breathing steadied. The world that weighed so heavily on her shoulders minutes ago seemed to lift, piece by piece, with the music. This wasn't just playing. This was remembering. She remembered sitting beside her father at their old piano, the soft glow of a lamp lighting their sheet music. She remembered her mother watching from the doorway, smiling gently. She remembered small performances at school, the applause, the feeling of being part of something beautiful. She remembered who she was before life took everything from her. And with every note she played, she felt that old self returning, little by little. In a corner of the restaurant, a woman wiped tears from her eyes without looking away from the piano. A couple near the windows leaned closer together, listening quietly. Even the younger staff members paused their work, watching her with disbelief and awe. No one interrupted. No one complained. The restaurant that had felt tense and incomplete suddenly felt alive again. alive in a way that even the hired pianist rarely achieved. As the music flowed, she closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself fully sink into the melody. It wasn't a song she had practiced. It was something she was creating in the moment, guided only by emotion and memory. It was the sound of longing, of pain, of quiet hope. It was the sound of a heart that had carried too much for too long. Her hands moved faster now, confident despite the years. The notes grew fuller, richer, flowing smoothly across the room. She felt like she was floating, like the music carried her above the weight of reality. But even as she played, a part of her remained aware of the present. The customers watching, the staff whispering, the manager staring with open astonishment. She wasn't invisible anymore. When the melody finally reached its gentle end, she let the last note linger in the air before lifting her hands slowly from the keys. The room remained silent for a breath, maybe two, silent in a different way than before, not empty but reverent. Then, unexpectedly, someone clapped. Another followed. And soon, the restaurant filled with applause, warm, genuine, surprised applause that echoed off the walls and touched something deep inside her. She blinked, stunned. She had never expected applause. She had never expected anyone here to care. She had only wanted to help, to ease the tension, to do something small to make things better for the night. But suddenly, she had become the center of attention. The manager quickly approached her, his expression a mix of disbelief and relief. "That was," he whispered, struggling for words. "I don't even know what to say. That was incredible." She looked down, shy and uncertain. "I just wanted to help." "You did more than help," he said. "You saved tonight." His voice was soft in a way she had never heard before, respectful, grateful. She stood from the bench, her legs unsteady. For the first time in years, she felt light, almost weightless. It was as if playing had awakened something inside her she thought was gone forever. Before she could step away, the wealthy guests from the special table approached. They had been some of the most frustrated earlier, but now their expressions were completely different. One of them, an older gentleman with a calm face, looked at her with interest. "You played beautifully," he said. "Where did you learn?" She hesitated. "My father taught me, when I was younger." "And you work here as a waitress?" "Yes." He exchanged a look with his colleagues, and something unspoken passed between them. "Well," he said with a small smile, "you have a gift. Don't lose it." She lowered her gaze. Compliments were unfamiliar to her, especially from people like him. "Thank you," she whispered. As she stepped back toward the staff area, her heart fluttered with a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long that she barely recognized it. Hope, quiet, fragile, but real. She didn't know it yet, but tonight's performance was only the beginning. Something extraordinary had started moving in her life, something she had never dared to imagine. And the millionaires watching her? They weren't done being surprised. Not even close. The moment the young waitress lifted her hands from the piano keys, the entire restaurant remained frozen in silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from confusion or shock, but from awe, deep, genuine awe. For a few seconds, no one breathed. No one moved. Everyone seemed caught between reality and whatever world her music had carried them into. Then suddenly, almost like a shared instinct, the room erupted. People clapped so loudly that it echoed off the tall walls. Some stood from their chairs without even knowing why. They just felt pulled to their feet. A few of the wealthy guests who had been annoyed earlier now looked almost embarrassed by their earlier comments. Their faces showed an emotion they didn't show often. Humility. The waitress just sat there, blinking, unsure if she should stand, bow, or quietly run back to the kitchen. Her hands were still trembling. She wasn't used to attention, especially not from people dressed in expensive suits and glittering jewelry. She kept staring at the shining piano keys, as if she couldn't believe she had actually played them. Her manager, who had looked worried the entire evening, now looked speechless himself. He kept glancing back and forth between the clapping guests and the young woman sitting at the piano, almost like he was seeing her for the first time. He had known she was quiet, hardworking, and humble, but he never imagined she had this hidden talent inside her. A woman near the front wiped her eyes gently. She wasn't crying loudly, but tears had definitely formed. Her partner noticed and placed a hand on her shoulder. They both looked toward the stage with warm, touched expressions. Another guest, a man with silver hair and a warm smile, was one of the first to push his chair back and stand up fully. His applause was slower, almost thoughtful, as if he was taking in the weight of what he had just witnessed. He wasn't the type to exaggerate reactions or pretend to be impressed. He was genuine, and right now he looked genuinely moved. He wasn't alone. In fact, it was almost amusing how the same people who had moments ago complained about delays or made snide jokes now looked like children seeing something magical for the first time. Their faces were soft, open, human. The young waitress swallowed hard and stood slowly, not really knowing what to do with her arms. She held them close to her sides and tried to smile politely, though she felt overwhelmed. She wasn't used to being the center of anything. She was someone who spent most days blending into the background, refilling water, cleaning tables, taking orders with a quiet nod. But in this moment, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't overlooked. She wasn't the girl struggling to pay bills or the girl who tried to hide her tired eyes with a small smile. She was the person who had just silenced a room full of millionaires with nothing but music. After almost a full minute of applause, the sound slowly softened. People began to settle back into their seats, though many kept watching her with admiration. A few whispered to each other, clearly impressed. Some even leaned over to nearby tables, saying words like, "Where did she learn that?" Or, "I had no idea she worked here." Just when she thought the moment was over, the silver-haired man from earlier stepped forward. He moved carefully, almost respectfully, as if he didn't want to frighten or overwhelm her. When he reached her, he stopped at a polite distance. "You have a rare gift," he said in a gentle voice. She looked down at her hands. "Thank you. I didn't expect anyone to react like this." "React like this?" The man smiled softly. "My dear, you left an entire room without words. That doesn't happen often." Her cheeks warmed. She wasn't sure what to say, so she simply nodded. Another guest chimed in from behind him. "You played like someone who's been on big stages your whole life." She almost laughed from the irony. The closest she had ever come to a stage was wiping one down after the performers left. Before she could respond, the silver-haired man adjusted his jacket and continued, "Forgive me for asking, but do you study music formally?" She hesitated. She didn't want to talk about her past or her struggles, not in front of all these people. So she spoke carefully. "I used to," she said quietly, "but life changed. I haven't played in a long time." The man studied her gently, as if trying to understand more without making her uncomfortable. "Well, if tonight is what you can do after not playing for a long time, then you are truly extraordinary." Her throat tightened a little. She wasn't used to praise, definitely not from people like him. Another woman approached, wearing a sparkling necklace and a soft smile. "I recorded some of your performance," she admitted. "Not for the internet, just for myself. I hope that's all right." The waitress nodded. "Yes, that's fine." The woman hesitated, then added, "But I think the world would love to hear you. There was so much emotion in your music." Emotion. That word stuck with her, because she didn't play to impress anyone. She played because, for the first time in years, her heart had asked her to. The music had carried old memories. Memories of better days, of her father teaching her patiently, of evenings filled with soft melodies instead of stress and exhaustion. While guests continued to compliment her softly, the restaurant owner finally approached, looking unusually formal for a man who usually barked orders and hurried from table to table. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "That was, well, incredible," he said, struggling to find the right words. "I didn't know you could play like that." She shrugged lightly. "I never said anything." "Well, you should have," he said, trying to sound gruff but failing. "That was the best thing that's ever happened in this place." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just smiled politely. But then the owner said something unexpected, something that made her blink. If you ever want to play here officially, as part of the restaurant, we could talk about it. Her eyes widened. You mean, like a regular musician? Yes, the owner replied quickly, almost as if he was afraid she might decline before he finished the sentence. Better hours, better pay. You wouldn't have to run around carrying plates all day. You could actually focus on your music. She felt her chest tighten again. Not from fear, but from the kind of hope she had forgotten she was allowed to feel. Before she could respond, the silver-haired man stepped closer again. And if I may add, he said gently, I would be honored to help you explore your future in music. I fund several arts programs and studios. Someone like you shouldn't let a gift like this fade away. Her eyes widened slightly. She wasn't used to receiving opportunities. She wasn't used to people offering her anything. Most days, she just tried to survive without making trouble. You don't have to answer now, the man continued, noticing her uncertainty. But think about it. Music like yours is rare. It deserves to be heard. The crowd had settled back into their meals, but their energy was different now. They ate slowly, talked quietly, and many glanced her way with admiration. The restaurant felt lighter, warmer, almost like it had been changed by what she had done. The waitress took a deep breath and stepped away from the piano, feeling like every part of her body was still buzzing from the experience. She walked back toward the kitchen, but something inside her felt different now. She didn't feel invisible anymore. She didn't feel like someone trapped behind bills and long shifts. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And not only seen, valued. She returned to her usual spot near the kitchen door, but her coworkers looked at her with completely new expressions. One of them grinned and whispered, "You never told us you could play like that." Another said, "That was amazing. I got chills." The young woman simply smiled, shy but grateful. She wasn't used to compliments, but tonight had given her more than she ever expected. She looked back at the piano one last time. It sat there quietly, almost waiting for her. It had been part of her childhood, part of her memories, part of her soul. And now, it had become part of her future again, even if she didn't fully understand how yet. All she knew was that everything in the restaurant had changed after she touched those keys. And deep inside, she felt that her life might be changing too. Slowly, gently, and perhaps for the better. When the restaurant finally closed that night, the young waitress found herself walking home with a strange feeling in her chest. Something warm, unfamiliar, and almost unreal. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement as she made her way along the quiet street. It wasn't a long walk, but she walked slowly, almost thoughtfully, as if her whole world had shifted and she needed time to understand it. Her hands were still tingling from the piano keys. Her ears still echoed with applause. Her heart still beat a little faster than normal. She had gone to work expecting a regular, tiring shift. Instead, she had walked into something that felt like a turning point. Something that didn't happen in ordinary lives like hers. As she reached her small rented room, she sat on the edge of her bed and let out a long, shaky breath. She replayed the night in her mind. Every note she played, every face in the crowd, every comment from the guests. She remembered the silver-haired man who said he wanted to help her, the woman who had recorded her performance, the unexpected compliments, and her manager's surprising offer. It was too much to absorb in one evening. She covered her face with her hands, partly overwhelmed, partly grateful. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel sad when she thought of her father. Instead, she could almost hear his voice telling her not to give up on music. She could imagine him nodding with pride. She smiled at the thought. The next morning, things felt different at work. When she walked in through the back door, her coworkers greeted her with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. "You were amazing last night," one said. "I still can't believe that was you," another added. Even the manager, who was usually strict and always rushing, paused long enough to give her a quick, nodding smile. "Good job yesterday." "Very good job," he said, which from him felt like a full speech. But the biggest surprise came just as she finished tying her apron. A familiar voice called out from the front of the restaurant. "May I speak to her for a moment?" She turned and saw the silver-haired man from the night before, dressed neatly again but with a more relaxed air this time. She blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. The manager quickly stepped aside, allowing him in. The man approached her with a gentle smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." She shook her head. "No, it's all right." He held out a small card. "I meant what I said last night," he told her. "Your talent shouldn't stay hidden behind tables and kitchen doors. You have something rare, something that could touch people far beyond this place." She looked down at the card in her hand. It had his name, a contact number, and the name of a music foundation she didn't recognize. She ran her thumb lightly over the raised letters. "I don't know what to say," she admitted softly. "You don't have to say anything today," he replied, his tone warm and patient. "Just think about it. If you're willing, I would like to help you get proper training again, produce some recordings, maybe even bring you onto a stage one day. You have everything it takes." She swallowed. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." He nodded as if he expected that answer. "That's all right. Great journeys don't begin with confidence. They begin with courage." For a moment, she didn't speak. She looked at the card again, feeling how heavy it suddenly seemed. It wasn't just paper. It was a door, a real door leading to a future she never thought she could reach again. "I'll think about it," she finally whispered. "That's all I ask," he said with a kind smile before taking his leave. She watched him walk out of the restaurant, still stunned by his offer. It all felt so unreal. She had gone from a quiet waitress with hidden talent to someone being offered opportunities that people dreamed of. During the rest of her shift, customers kept asking about the performance they had heard whispers about. Some had heard the recording from the night before, which had started spreading quickly among guests. Others had just arrived that day and wanted to know who the mysterious pianist was. Whenever they asked, she simply smiled politely and said, "Just someone helping out." But deep down, she felt something growing inside her. Something she had pushed away for too long. Hope. Real, meaningful hope. Later in the evening, the manager approached her again. This time, his tone was calmer, almost nicer than usual. "About that offer I made yesterday," he said. "If you want to play here a few nights a week, the position is yours. No pressure. You can still keep your regular job, or we can shift your hours. Whatever works for you." She looked at him, surprised by his kindness. "You really think the customers would want that?" He actually laughed, a rare sound from him. "Want it? They've been asking me all day when you'll play again. Trust me, you'll draw more people here than our old pianist ever did." She felt a small wave of confidence rise in her chest. "Then maybe I could try. Not every day, but a few times a week." He nodded firmly. "Done." Suddenly, her life felt like it was moving faster than she could keep up with. Opportunities she never imagined were now being placed directly in front of her. After her shift ended, she sat alone at the piano. The restaurant was quiet again, empty except for the soft hum of lights and the distant sound of dishes being washed in the kitchen. She lifted her hands slowly and touched the keys. This time she wasn't nervous. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't pretending to be someone small. She began to play a soft melody, one she remembered from her childhood. The notes filled the empty space around her, warm and gentle, almost like they were hugging her. As she played, she imagined a different version of her future. She imagined studying music again, performing on a real stage, helping her mother live comfortably, walking through life without the constant weight of struggle pressing on her shoulders. The idea didn't feel impossible anymore. For once, it felt close enough to touch. When she finished, she sat quietly for a moment, her fingers resting gently on the keys. She finally understood something she had forgotten. Music hadn't abandoned her. She had abandoned herself. And now, she was ready to return to the path she once loved. The next few weeks brought more changes than she expected. The recording from that first night was shared online by a customer who couldn't resist showing it to others. Slowly at first, then quickly, more people began watching. Comments spread. People asked about the mysterious waitress pianist. And the restaurant began filling up more than usual. Some guests came just to hear her play. Every time she stepped onto the small platform, she felt nervous, but she also felt alive. Each performance made her stronger, more confident, more open to the possibility of a different future. Eventually, she called the silver-haired man. She didn't know exactly what she wanted to say, but she knew she didn't want to let the chance slip away. When he answered, she took a deep breath. "I think I'm ready," she told him. His voice warmed instantly. "Then let's begin." And so, her new life started, not with fame, not with wealth, not with a sudden leap into greatness, but with steady steps, gentle progress, and real human support. She attended lessons through the foundation he sponsored. She practiced daily. She balanced work and music slowly, carefully, but with determination. Her mother grew stronger and happier watching her return to her passion. And in time, slow, beautiful time, she found herself performing at small events, then larger ones, then on stages she had once only seen in pictures. Every time she played, she remembered the night she sat in the restaurant, scared and unsure, lifting her hands to the piano for the first time in years. She remembered how the room had fallen silent, how the applause had changed something inside her, how people who barely knew her had believed in her. But most of all, she remembered understanding something important. Sometimes life gives you a moment, a single, unexpected moment that turns everything around. A moment when you finally step out of the shadows and into who you were meant to be. For her, that moment happened the night she touched the piano. And from that moment on, she never let go of her music again.